and welcome to our latest episode of the Kith and Kin podcast, Stories from the Hospitality Industry. And I'm really happy to welcome Lorraine here to tell us all about the ups and downs that have brought her to where she is and what makes the hospitality industry so special. So hi, thank you so much for coming and joining me on this conversation. So can we just start with an introduction to who you are and what you do, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Lorraine Copes, and I am the founder of a social enterprise called Be Inclusive Hospitality. And we are change makers in the industry working towards a more equitable and inclusive hospitality industry without a specialism on race, but working across the board.
That I've, as I say, I've heard you speak, and I know, and I've been following what you've been doing and seeing it all, and I just know how exciting what you're doing is and the impact it's having, and I do want to get there and have that conversation. But I know you've got a really interesting story through the hospitality industry. So let's get started from where you started. So and get to where you are now. So where did it all start?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So it started over 20 years ago. So I went to university, studied logistics, and then found myself in the pub industry as a supply chain planning and analyst in Burton-on-Trent. And that led me to hospitality. It was the first place that I realized that, I could eat and drink for free alongside doing my day job. And I was sold on that basis. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
from there, moved into procurement. I've worked across the industry, so anything from contract catering, fine dining, casual dining. I mentioned pubs. I've worked across the industry, all within a procurement and supply chain capacity. And my career has progressed through obviously hard work, but actually, when I think about my career progression, it has definitely been fueled by changing place of employment. So at the points that I was ready for the next level up, I would
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah. So basically, you talked coming from that. So from a logistics point of view, knowing that was a route you wanted to take, and sort of accidentally fell into the pub industry because that was what the job was. But then, as the
Yeah,
opportunities became available, it sort of
yeah, exactly.
moved through
Yeah,
it like that. I've heard
I'd
you
add
talk
to
about.
that.
Go on, go on.
hmm Now I'd add to that that logistics wasn't something that I wanted to do. Logistics was my at that point in my life reasoning on a stable and logical and sensible career path. So
Yeah.
I never enjoyed my degree. I found it boring. I'm a creative, so I didn't really enjoy it. But I think it speaks to kind of the decisions you make when, from a working class background, your parents are like insistent on you going to university,
Yeah.
and you don't necessarily choose what you love. You choose what you think is sensible, and that's what I did.
Yeah, and that's a really common theme when we have these conversations, that so many people sort of
Yeah.
go off and make the sensible decisions and then discover, oh, there's hospitality over here. I could have been doing this fun thing instead. And you say you're very creative, which obviously you are, because you've developed, you've set up this social enterprise, which requires a huge amount of creativity as much as anything else. But did you, when you were younger and went to university and ended up in logistics, did you recognize that creativity that you were missing, or was it something that sort of came later that you realized?
Um, in hindsight, I look back and recognize I've always been creative, but my outlets have been very different. So I've always been an expressive dresser, and it came out in that outlet, as well as the extracurricular activities I held outside of my career, which has long been things like writing, love photography, love film, art. It came out, more so, yeah, as an extracurricular activity. But actually, now in hindsight, I realize that creativity um, was in existence in every part of what I
Yeah.
did for a career. So, using procurement and supply chain as an example, procurement in particular, what I really loved about the field, and I still love it, is that you have a designated end goal, which is often to save the business that you're working for money or mitigate costs. And how you get from A to B, there are, your typical tenders, brand partnerships that are put in place, but how you move from A to B and how you get there is really, really flexible. And I've always loved that creativity of, we have a problem, how do we find the solution, and how we get there is not rigid, and defined within like really close parameters. So I've always enjoyed creative problem solving, but I didn't recognize it as creative,
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
time. And now that I run a business, and um, partnerships is something that has continued into the business. And I love when, a business either gets in touch or we have a conversation and they say that we want to work with you and this is what we want to achieve. And then we collaboratively look at how we achieve that end goal, meeting our objective and meeting theirs. And that really is one of the things I love about not only the business I run, but the freedom that it grants to create solutions, just through, two businesses often coming together and creatively dreaming up what that solution project might look like.
Absolutely. So, just for anybody who doesn't really understand what procurement and even things like supply
Yeah,
chain and stuff is in that,
yeah,
because I think this is a really exciting thing about, well, these conversations, but also about the hospitality industry. Just
yeah,
hospitality pretty much covers every opportunity you
of
could
course.
possibly
Yeah, of
think
course.
of,
Yeah,
and things like, I mean, obviously smaller businesses are doing this work, but they just don't know that
yeah,
that's what it's called. But when you get into those larger organizations, they have people like you coming in and potentially
yeah,
whole departments working through all this. So
yeah,
what is the process of sort of procurement or managing the supply
yeah,
chain and all of that?
yeah, yeah. I mean, the best way to describe it is when you go to a restaurant as a consumer or you work within a restaurant, the food and the drink and the crockery and the plateware and the furniture, um, all has to be negotiated with the supplier. Now, I say it has to be negotiated. For some smaller businesses, they
Yeah,
basically procure in the same way you and I do.
yeah.
We don't go to a department store and negotiate for the cost of a toaster because we're buying one generally. But when you're buying 100 toasters across multiple businesses, then that gives you buying power, and that puts you in a position where you can have conversations rather than with just solely the wholesaler. You can have a conversation with the manufacturer to say that we want to buy 100 rather than one, and what is the best price that you can offer on that one. And then it's also looking at things like quality assurance. So due diligence is really important around where we buy our food and drink, and that the appropriate regulations are in place. And supply chain is really around moving product from A to B. So there's a cost associated to moving everything, whether food, drink, or otherwise. And there are ways of optimizing your costs by looking at your supply chain. So, what I definitely say is that in some parts of the industry, procurement and supply chain still really isn't understood. And with the year that's about to hit us within the
Yeah.
industry, businesses really need to focus on their costs more than ever before, because there's always better deals to be done without compromising quality, which is ultimately the game and the goal. So
And
yeah, it's a fun job though as well.
I was going to
You
say,
know.
because and then I guess there's a lot of the creativity as well, because it's not just the here's what we want, here's the deal to be done. It's also looking at all of those different paths in that supply chain and
Absolutely,
finding where the
absolutely.
efficiencies are, or even, I mean, I'd imagine like an example would be when you're designing your menu, if you can get as much as possible from one supplier or from suppliers that are nearby to each other, that actually you can find efficiencies within your menu without compromising on the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's endless opportunities for efficiency when designing a menu. And that factors in also things like portion sizes, seasonality. The list is exhaustive,
Well,
but
yeah,
ultimately it's really understanding your product cost and recognizing that you can take costs out of your supply chain and your product without changing or with minimal changes to your actual menu. So really important function, still really misunderstood within the industry. And it's something that I'm really passionate about and still do small amounts of kind of fractional support on procurement because it's something
yeah,
I love.
yeah,
The other thing that I really love about the function is that you become an expert on everything that you procure because you have to ultimately have and gain enough knowledge so that you can then put in place the right deal for the business, right? So, and I'm very people centered as well. So, working with loads of stakeholders internally and externally.
yeah. So, I mean, and we could do a whole episode just talking about procurement and supply chain because it is absolutely fascinating and there's so much to learn and to apply to all hospitality businesses. But I absolutely
There is, yeah,
I cannot possibly invite you onto this and not talk about Be Inclusive Hospitality because it's
yeah.
absolutely fantastic and you know having such a huge impact. So there's lots of things here, but let's just start with how you went from, that basically that corporate job working in hospitality, doing that to then setting up a social enterprise. What happened? How did that happen?
Sure. The one thing I'll just finish by saying on the procurement and supply chain, it feels really weird for me talking about it because if you think about my career span, it's been like 22 years, of which like 90% of that time has been spent in procurement and supply chain, and now the majority of my time is spent elsewhere. I often reflect and think this feels a bit strange, it's weird,
Yeah,
but yeah. Anyway, so I suppose uh, if we go back in time to 2020, and at that point, I was procurement director for the Wolseley Hospitality Group. So on exec boards for the businesses that I worked. So prior to that was Gordon Ramsay, and prior to that was Shake Shack. And so I'm on the leadership teams of for these organisations, and it's always actually bugged me throughout my time. Two things. The first is that, especially as I moved up the ranks, there was just never anyone that looked like me in any room I was in,
yeah,
and that's extended to conferences and events.
yeah,
And then the second thing is it's quite typical of businesses in the industry to celebrate their diversity and to talk about how many nationalities they have within their organization. Still happens today. But actually, what was never acknowledged or even talked about is the fact that if you are Black or of an ethnic minority, you're more likely to be in the low paid roles and never in the
yeah,
senior roles.
yeah,
And that was never confronted, never talked about, never acknowledged. And so I had a career break in 2018, which led me down a different path of career coaching. It's just something I wanted to do from a self development perspective. And that really was a really transformational time for me because I decided in that moment that I love procurement, I love hospitality, but I also want to do something that is more purpose led.
yeah,
And so during the pandemic, I wrote the business plan and launched Be Inclusive Hospitality. Recognized there was a gap in the sector, and it's something I care about. Obviously, it's very personal to me as a Black woman, but yeah, I wanted to do something I care about, and so yeah, the rest is history, and we've been running for 4.5 years now.
And I'm saying it is having impact because I mean it's even just that acknowledgement that as you say it's very easy to just look at statistics, and I mean I've had this conversation with you, and obviously I don't have the same insight that you have, but just
Yeah,
even from
yeah.
my experience, when you walked into those rooms and there was very few women there, and yet when you look at the statistics, that actually
Mm-hmm.
hospitality is made up, the majority of hospitality is made up of women. But then when you're walking
Exactly.
into these rooms, and the
Yeah,
higher up you go, the less and less people, women there are in the room. I
yeah,
find that, and when I talk to people
yeah.
outside the industry, they don't know that or see that. So to actually be challenging around these issues is absolutely, amazing. So So what? So I know you do loads of research. Well, one, I know you. Let's start with the research and stuff, and all of the other stuff around there. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Super.
what?
So, just even to build on your point about gender, because, I mentioned that we specialize in race, but we do a lot of learning and development and resources on other protected characteristics. And if we look at gender for an example, we know gender, I think it's 52% of the industry identify as women, the remainder men, so slightly over the UK population. And we know that representation doesn't translate the more senior you become. Exactly the same being the case for ethnic minorities. So 18% of the UK population identify as Black, Asian, or ethnic minority. Similarly, in the industry, 17.8% of the industry identify as Black, Asian, ethnic minority. So we know it's
Yeah,
on parity.
yeah. So
What I've
yeah,
long observed, it seems to be a far more comfortable and more understood acknowledgement that if representation in the sector is on par with the UK population and then they're not represented in senior levels, there's an issue. And that is really acknowledged and recognised for women, but it's still not for ethnic
yeah,
minorities. So
yeah,
a big part of what we do is really around education. We've produced 5 industry reports to date, and the very first identified or acknowledged this 17.8%, which was using government census data. Since that point, we have conducted various surveys of the industry. So we've collected over 4,000 views and experiences. And very recently, we released another report called Careers in Hospitality, Removing Barriers to Progression. All of our reports are free. We see, because of the education piece, and we recognize that there's some real learning to be done around race in the industry. And we don't want there to be a blocker to access that information. But ultimately, our reports are not to, confirm or deny that there's a problem. We know there's a problem. It's really around this is a status quo. What do we do with this information now that we have it? And that has really underpinned and driven all of our kind of initiatives today. And our initiatives fall into 3 broad categories. One is a professional development pillar. So that is fully funded by either grant funders or brands. And we deliver things like mentorship schemes, workshops, qualifications, funding to support the upward social mobility of ethnic minorities in the industry. To date, we've supported over 500 members of the community, and that work continues. The second strand of the business is ED&I consultancy. And so we are a service provider in essence to the industry, and we work with brands, small, medium, and large, to help them be more inclusive. And then the third and final is around partnerships. So we work with a lot of global brands who have similar interests, aims to ourselves, and we collaborate on projects and initiatives. And to date, that has included anyone from Mars Foods, Open Table, to Uber Eats, we've worked with for a number of years. So that's kind of the business model.
and it's just absolutely. And then, as I say, you are having big impacts, even just in terms of raising it on the agenda of what people are talking about, which is an important step in trying to create a fairer, more inclusive industry.
Definitely.
And I was
I
just
think that awareness piece.
yeah.
I was going to say, I think that awareness piece is so important. It's obviously the work that we do is really around creating impact, and awareness is not something that you can measure. However, what I do know is that there are multiple businesses that have told me when they are looking for either people for events or to feature in industry press, they head to our social media, and that they're aware that talent will be visible and accessible that aren't yet otherwise, visibly accessible in the kind of main in the ether. My ultimate aim is there'll be a point where Be Inclusive Hospitality needn't exist
Yeah.
because the industry is really caught up.
Yeah.
But that's the whole ultimate aim.
No, and I do think, and I think your research is a really important part of that, because you need to be able to. I mean, you need to be able to just say in black and white, this is the situation as it is now, but
Definitely.
also be able to see and track that change over time, because that is a really important
Definitely.
part of demonstrating the progress and actually the impact that it does have. And I know that you've also won you've won some big awards. I mean, personally as well, haven't you?
I
For this
have,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have, and it always comes as a real surprise, because my why was never really around recognition. It was just really around impact. And so we've been recognized as one of the top 100 social enterprises in the UK for a number of consecutive years. I was recognized by Condé Nast Traveller. They have a restaurant awards as a game changer of the year last year. Also GQ Food and Drink Award winner, and Code Hospitality Top 100 women in hospitality for I think the past 4 consecutive years. So there's been a few, which is
Amazing.
really great. And
Sure.
actually, I see the real purpose of awards. They're great, but they really raise awareness about the work that we do, and so I think that's a huge benefit that we're always keen to take, even though it's not our why.
No, of course, but just so in terms of sort of the, because I know you go and you talk about this a lot, and it is not just about raising awareness. It is also about giving
Yeah.
individuals, but also organisations the tools to make a difference. So,
Yeah.
what would you say sort of the key things that organisations, large and small, might be missing on some of these
hmm
things, or not, or what
Yeah.
sort of easy wins that they could be doing?
Yeah. I think I think something that's really important on this topic is objectivity. And I say that because we work with loads of businesses that don't yet have a diverse team, but are working towards that. And so just be sure to bring in contractors that can offer that objectivity, because all too often I see businesses working with other businesses and it's echo chamber.
Yeah,
So that objectivity piece is really important, but also education is key. It really sits with me, and I talk about this all the time when I'm on panels in particular. The idea that it's acknowledged and accepted that women should be on the board if they're represented in the industry, but the
yeah, yeah,
same understanding and acknowledgement is not afforded to ethnically diverse talent. And it just makes me wonder, it's exactly the same thing, but why is it not viewed the same? And I think that speaks to some underlying and underlying ideas of who should be at the top and who should not, quite simply because from a logical perspective, it's identically the same thing,
yeah, yeah,
but it's just not acknowledged in that way. And I do think education, who we are, our worldview is learned and it can be unlearned. And that's why the education piece is really important. It's why delivering workshops is a really big part of what we do. And it's something we really enjoy because we, in the moment, either myself or our associates, we see the aha moments and we see that transformation begin because people are learning like about areas that they never have ever before in life, especially in the workplace. So
yeah, yeah.
education is really important before comes any action, I'd say.
And I love that because I say I've heard you speak, and I know that one of the things you were talking about is like, sort of how people speak to each other, and how, and also it was also about your love of the industry. I can't remember what you said, but it was something about asking people what they eat for Sunday on Sunday as being
Mm,
a way of getting
yeah,
understanding people.
yeah.
I love it.
That yeah, and that was just very much born out of the idea that I think what is really important in just broadening our worldview is understanding each other and understanding your colleagues and your peers. And if you are, which most hospitality businesses have, a real diverse group of people, it's important as an inclusive leader to understand your team, right? And all too often, there's a lot of kind of stammering and stopping off the back of being fearful of asking something that might be offensive, but context is everything. And I always say prioritize building relationships with your team. And how I build relationships with people, I mean, I'm obsessed with food and drink. Like, I am obsessed. I travel for food and drink. Obviously, I've worked in food and drink. And especially when I meet people from cultures or heritages that I've never encountered, I'm always curious, like, what did you eat growing up? So it's
Yeah,
always been quite a nice way for me to better understand, the heritages or the cultures and traditions of people that I've worked with or have worked with in my teams. But I think it's just super. If you're interested in food, whatever it is that you're interested in, there's usually like a common thread that we all have, that we all do. Food is definitely one, right? We all eat.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And I guess when you ask those kind of questions, like, what did you eat when you were growing up? Or I think when you said, what do you have, on Sunday or whatever to eat? But those questions, they're really these really open questions, which yes, become about food, but actually then people become about who they're eating it with, and
exactly.
all of the traditions and everything else that come around those occasions, which gives you such an insight into what is
It
important for
really
somebody else,
does.
and how they view their own lives and their own what's important to them. And it's such. I mean, I heard you say it, and I just thought, oh my goodness, what an amazing question to ask
Mm,
somebody. It's so
yeah.
it just opens up, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's also identifying though what's important to them or not, as it
Yeah,
might not have been. I mean, for me, I always ask. It was a significant day of the week for me. Like we didn't have desserts every day of the week, but Sundays we would, and we'd always have food that like took a really long time to be cooked, like marinated, and like there was just a vibe in my house because my parents both worked. So Sunday was the day. It was a day of rest, and we had an amazing dinner, music, and it was important to me. And I appreciate it's not important to everyone, but it still gives you a window into someone's world, whether food was important or not. So I think it's really helpful in that respect.
amazing. And honestly, what you're doing is absolutely fantastic with Be Inclusive
Thank
Hospitality. But
you.
when you launched it, and now as you go out
Yeah.
and sort of spread the word, so to say,
hmm
what is the reaction from the industry? How are people reacting to what you're doing, which is essential and really important work?
Yeah, I think it's definitely from day one been a mixed bag. And it's been a mixed bag because, for the first 3 years of the business, or 4 years actually, up until today, we've really been fortunate in that brands and businesses and individuals constantly outreach and say, hey, be inclusive. How can we work with you? How can we collaborate? How can we support? That has been a consistent since day one. But simultaneous to that, there are many organizations across the industry, and that's industry bodies, service providers, and employers that, and it's not really about engaging with Be Inclusive Hospitality, by the way. It's really around doing the work within this field,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
making progress within it because,
Or
we work
addressing
very
any change.
absolutely exactly that. And, I liken it to sustainability in that there are other service providers in the industry, and we don't view any business as competition. Because if you are doing good work to help businesses to be better, then that's a super positive thing. And for that reason, we collaborate, and we partner with businesses that do, in essence, very similar things to ourselves, right? However, there are businesses, as I say, across the industry that aren't doing a thing or even acknowledging that race is a dimension of ED&I.
Yeah,
And, how we choose to react to that is we don't. We focus on the businesses that are.
yeah.
And from a place of sanity, from a place of mental health, it would do me personal harm to even pay any attention at all to businesses that aren't. It would.
No,
If
I totally get it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
yeah,
I
and
imagine
so
there's even whole pockets of the industry that aren't ready yet to address any of this.
definitely,
Yeah,
and that is the word ready, because every business that we speak to, they will say, "Oh, we're at the beginning of the journey." Businesses have been saying that since four years ago, and they'll continue to. And it's at that point that you're on the journey. Your journey is your own. But our sole focus is really on those businesses that are doing the work, and the community that we're here to serve and support. And the two combined make for a really great and varied business, that we're building and growing, and really optimistic for the future, and optimistic for the future off the back of, we talk about research underpinning our work. Our first research project, actually it was our second research project. We had a launch event at the Oxo Tower Bar, and we had about 45 people in attendance. And then, at the beginning of February, we launched our fifth report, and we filled an auditorium that has a capacity for 200 people.
Amazing, yeah.
And that speaks to directionally the impact that we're having, the increase in reach, which is really important on
Yeah.
the awareness piece and then action. And so our aim is just to continue on the path, creating impact, driving change, and importantly, supporting those who also love the industry and want to realize successful careers within the industry, but otherwise are not getting the opportunity, tools, and resources to help them get there.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. So, and long may you continue this fantastic work.
Thank
because
you.
it's so inspiring to see anyone that's got a very clear purpose and they're on a mission and you're taking everyone with you, and it's just exciting to witness. But if anybody wants to get in touch, because I know that you do speaking and you're talking about this, but also access to the research, it's all available, isn't it, for people? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. So best bet is the website, which is www.bihospitality.co.uk. Equally, we're on all social platforms. So we're on Instagram, LinkedIn, actively Facebook, and then we've got a new TikTok account, which we post a lot of our videos. We have a lot of events.
Yes, yeah.
So we're across all social channels. But if you Google us, you'll find us for sure.
Amazing. I'm so excited. I'm definitely will be checking in again because I want to see where this goes, because I mean, you're doing something absolutely fantastic. And
Thanks,
thank
Cassie.
you so much for joining me and telling
No
us a little bit
problem.
about
Thanks for
it.
having
And we'll
me.
be in touch again soon. Cheers. Bye.
Super. Thanks, Cassie.